Welcome back to the DCS SITREP, the new show on all things DCS world and occasionally other bits and pieces that sneak in, as you'll see. DCS World is the premier combat flight simulator for the home PC, if you're not familiar, and it's brought to us by Eagle Dynamics and its numerous third-party affiliates. Once again, I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog. Let's tuck into this week's newsletter from ED, which showcased highlights from Ugra Media's Cold War map, which I must say looks absolutely fantastic. So let's have a look at the blurb here. They tell us that the DCS Cold War Germany map, long requested by DCS customers, recreates Central Europe at the height of the Cold War in the 1980s. This map of West Germany, East Germany, parts of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Low Countries centers on the strategically important Fulda Gap and also includes areas of the Baltic Sea for naval operations. Really cool. The map measures 980 by 800 kilometers and accurately reproduces the cities of Berlin, Frankfurt am Main, Hamburg, Magdeburg, Leipzig, Hanover, Lübeck, and others besides. The map features over 100 highly detailed military airfields and heliports such as Ramstein, Spangdahlem, Hahn, Bitburg, Sembach, and large civilian airfields like Tegel, Schönfeld, Tempelhof, Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Hanover. Numerous army bases, listening posts, naval bases, training grounds, weapon storage facilities, and the militarized frontier between East and West Germany, which I'm curious to see how much of the Berlin Wall actually gets put in here as well, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, Ugra Media has invested in detail, providing a rich environment for endless complex missions and campaigns with accurate reproduction of the road and rail network, along with the power plants and electricity grid, industrial sites, mines, tunnels, and stadiums, rail yards and stations, as well as cultural landmarks. Pretty cool stuff. So the initial release of the map will focus on the central portions of East and West Germany, with summer textures that will allow the recreation of unlimited what-if scenarios in Europe. Later updates will add details, including additional airfields and other features to the north and south, as well as to the west to include parts of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark, with spring, autumn, and winter textures. So stay tuned, in other words, for updates to the map once it's released with regards to the seasonal adjustments and environments. So cool. Now, they are saying here, let's check out those screenshots, which you should already be looking at here. And as you saw from those screenshots, there's a high degree of detail and a lot of unique era objects that Ugra Media has plugged into the map, which is going to be very, very appealing for fans of the era. Now, one thing I enjoyed was the fact that they're focused on a central portion of the map for that initial release and will develop additional portions spreading outwards rather than the sectional approach that ED has taken to, say, the Afghanistan map or Iraq. Now, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, of course, between those maps. Europe is much more densely populated, so I think that approach works well for the locale and perhaps probably wouldn't work as effectively in those other maps cited because, again, of the population layout and the general geographical features. So it's an interesting approach, and it's one that I think is going to be useful for that particular map and obviously gets us up and running straight away. I'm looking forward to the release of the map, what it offers in terms of those scenarios that we mentioned before. It also represents really a pretty fascinating era in our modern and cultural history, where the Berlin Wall cemented quite literally the divide between the Soviet Union and the West, and a rather nasty and frosty threat of nuclear annihilation. Construction for the Berlin Wall actually began in the 1960s, 1961, to stop the flow of people between East and West, especially in the westerly direction, as West Germany became the obvious place to live if you were looking for a better way of life. Khrushchev's long reach of Soviet doctrine and oppression. The Soviet Union and the Kremlin's vast tentacles of spy networks, puppet administrations, and KGB operations were renowned for violent crackdowns in satellite states where citizens tried to push back on the repressive dogma. Now, growing up in the 80s, I recall hearing stories about the thirst for American denim jeans and Western rock music, which filtered its way across the border. And I still remember to this day watching on the news the Berlin Wall coming down. It was pretty amazing, an amazing time in history. I remember too, in the early 90s, sitting in the back seat of a cramped 1974 Ford Capri, which belonged to a mate of mine while we were heading back from university lectures one day, and we were just blaring Scorpions' Wind of Change. So the end of the 80s, early 90s was a pretty interesting time. Now, the hangover of that repression, of course, is something that we're largely still dealing with, especially in Ukraine right now, thanks to an allegedly mediocre former East German KGB agent named Vladimir Putin. East Germany was apparently his old stomping ground between 1985 and 1990, so he witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union and the demolition of the wall and the ushering in of what we believed at the time was going to be a democratic version of Russia. Unfortunately, though, that collapse, some scholars have theorized, is in part perhaps some of the motivations for Putin's grand designs to restore Russia to some sort of imagined glory. As the Brits will testify, the post-World War II era saw the end of its once glorious colonial empire, which probably was on life support by the 1930s anyway. So imperialist dogma today really does have a hideous anachronistic tang to it. Nonetheless, it doesn't stop some people from imagining glory days. Now, regardless of the history and the politics there, I still think it remains a very interesting map. And again, as I said before, really looking forward to the history associated with this and the release. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Now, Edie reminded us that the spring sale is still in place, so don't miss out on savings of up to 50% in both the eStore and now the Steam store as well, which we discussed last week. I'll refer you to the newsletter if you're wondering what's on sale. As I mentioned last week, there are some amazing bargains, and if you haven't played the game recently too, there was an update that provided fixes for numerous campaigns, I think just a couple of weeks ago. With some bug fixing there, but there are some great sales, 50% off. Do go check out the eStore or the Steam store if you're interested in a particular module and are wanting to save some money. Now, moving on to news not covered in the newsletter, there was a really interesting update from Heatblur, who, of course, are still working feverishly on the F4E Phantom 2, which also has some carryover effect for their other modules as well. Now, firstly, the module won an award as the best DCS add-on at the Flight Sim Awards recently, so congratulations to the team for their efforts. It's well deserved, probably no surprise. It's been an amazing launch, and remember that Heatblur introduced some firsts for DCS with regards to the release of this particular module. Now, secondly, the team described the following as part of their 2024 focus and what they're going to be working on in 2025. So they say here that last year they were focused on bug fixing, improvements, and a lot of underlying core and structural changes to their code bases in order to improve it for the future Phantom updates and to port features to other modules, as well as the launch of some new content in the form of the F4E campaign. So this is really exciting. Now this year, they've turned their attention back to feature development, and it's time to start shipping these new features. So one of those is going to be starting off next month, apparently, they hope, is the Jester modding capability and opening up the API to the community. Now, Jester is built on an extensible modular SDK based around intuitive Lua scripting workflows to model human-like crew members for high-fidelity aircraft modules. It's a pretty sophisticated piece of kit. Remember, this is an updated version of the original Jester from the F-14, and they wanted to do much more with 2.0, and that proved to be pretty challenging. Again, the intent, was to allow users like you and I to do some modding with it. So what they say here is you'll be able to override and extend almost any part of Jester AI, creating entire new routines, interesting missions or campaign content, or more. And I will post a link in the description below so that you can see the manuals with regards to that. So that's going to be a huge boom for those of you who make campaigns, or like Reflected Simulations, who's been doing a lot of work on the F4 of late and is about to release a red flag campaign for the aircraft as well. So really exciting, and the team are interested to see, and certainly I am too, what people do with Jester. Now, another improvement they say coming soon is the addition of the first pass of character customization. Remember, they said they were going to create uniforms and flexible options for people to create custom pilots and things with the exact flight gear that you want. Now, once they've done that, and at that time, they'll be introducing new flight gear, such as new helmet types, new flight suits, and more. So presumably some accessories. I wonder if they'll have different sunglasses, that kind of stuff. And eventually the system will be ported to the F-14 as well. So that's a huge boom for that aircraft. And again, like I said before, a lot of firsts for DCS World, which is really cool. So they go on to say that more visual elements and some associated functionality are also on the way, such as the dog bone gun camera and eventually gun camera functionality, as well as additional visual customization options, for example, the Greek Phantoms. And we talked about gun cameras with that F-100D module from Grinelli, who have created a gun camera. This is independent of what you see in the cockpit, which is really cool. It saves that track to a file that you can observe later on. So pretty cool. So some of these visual customization options include the refueling probe, which was used by Israeli Phantoms, and the removal of the football antenna on the tail, or addition of the newer generation one, as well as plenty of other bits and bobs, they say. Where feasible and relevant for an F4E as depicted by the module, these visual options will be functional, and where otherwise not relevant, they will simply be visual additions for a more accurate representation of national phantoms. So that variation between the different countries that used it will therefore be represented, but obviously not all of those features they described are going to be fully functional. Now, work has also begun on the Jester pod. Now, Jester being able to utilize the pave spike targeting pod. So this will be helpful in single player, where you'll be able to rely more on your backseater to get crosshairs on target and precision strike using this early targeting pod. They expect that this feature will be finished in April, but it may be ported later in another patch, depending on how things go. Now, finally, they're putting on the finishing touches to the F4 paint kit, which will allow you to better create new liveries for yourself and the community. We'll also soon be adding a decal layer on top of the surface of the aircraft for easy customization of many aircraft modexes. They go on to say that I encourage you to stay tuned for more updates throughout the year as they add new novel features to the Phantom, which are not described yet, and start adding new features as part of the DMAS upgrade package. So they want to thank everybody for flying the DCS F4, and they hope that you enjoy these new features coming down the pipeline over the next few months, and I think we will. It's an amazing aircraft, and their team should be congratulated for the work they've done on it. It's a very, very exciting package, and as I said, it features some things that we haven't seen in DCS World, and it looks like we're going to see more of those features, like the customization of the pilots and so on and so forth. Really, really cool stuff. Now, speaking of other third-party developers, Octopus G showcased performance characteristics for the LA7. It was an interesting aerobatic video, which I'm sure many of you saw, and I did publish on my community tab, if I recall. I'm still betting on this being the first module released this year, certainly in terms of aircraft, but maybe Ugra Media push out the Cold War Germany map ahead of them. We'll see how that goes. Stay tuned. It's an exciting little aircraft, and it looks like they've done a really nice job on it, so we'll see how it comes to fruition during the course of the year. Also, as many of you saw, I did publish part 1 of a 2-part series on the F-100D Super Sabre for DCS World, which is being built and designed by Grinelli Designs for the game, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for that video, so do check that out. Part 2 was released last night, and I hope you get a chance to look at it. They're both pretty long videos, but there was a lot of detail, a lot of discussion. I had hoped to lift a little of the veil on the development processes within the constraints that teams can actually reveal with their NDAs and things with Eagle Dynamics. Sometimes I feel there is a cynical position in some members of the community here who've had a pretty vocal, I guess, impact on negativity surrounding DCS World with regards to, I think, primarily because of the Razbam situation. But like I said, I was hoping to kind of counteract some of that negativity and again, lift some of the veil on the work that goes on. I think there are some people out there that think that these modules are kind of plucked out of somebody's ass and then they're half finished purely for hype and cash grab reasons. And as you saw with these videos, that's definitely not a successful business strategy and not what most of our third-party developers are doing. Certainly, I don't believe that's even what ED is doing, despite a lot of criticism sometimes on some modules. You can see in the video just how much work goes into developing these aircraft, the research, the discussion with SMEs, and so on and so forth. So it's a really big project, even for an older aircraft like this. And again, I do hope you enjoyed this series, and I hope to bring you more info on the F-100D in the near future with the team. I've been in discussion with Grinelli about getting some seat time in that aircraft too. So hopefully we can bring you some more material. We're not quite ready for that yet, but stay tuned. So that almost brings us to the end of the SITREP. I'm trying to keep abreast of all the third-party developers and all the work that's going on. As you saw last week, we have several popular models as well producing content that really, I think a lot of people have agreed, and I agree too, actually, that some of these modded aircraft really need to be official. The Jaguar, for example, and the T-38 come to mind immediately. But we'll have to wait and see if that's feasible or possible. Now, Spud Spike, as he goes by now, Spud Knocker as he used to be known, the content creator normally known as Spud Knocker, I guess. But anyway, highlighted some news he believes signaled a possible resolution to the Razbam ED dispute. As far as I can tell, there's no official announcement from either team. That's what we're waiting for here. So that might have been a little bit precipitous. Ron Zambrano reposts a lot of content from Micropros on his X account, kind of reinforcing that belief that there is some sort of relationship there, some sort of contract. We're not exactly sure. He also posted a lot of images of his DCS F-15E2 from other people tagging him in X and throwing up images of this amazing aircraft. And again, none of this signals anything tangible in terms of a resolution. We just have to accept that until an official announcement is made by the respective teams, that the impasse remains. And so too, therefore, does the status quo of the Razbam modules as they are right now, which sucks. And I love the F-15. I think it's one of the best cockpits to work in. Looks the best in VR, I must say, but we're still missing a lot of content surrounding that module. People aren't willing to produce, campaigns and missions really, and because the possibility that the resolution isn't reached and the module even disappears out of the game is still a possibility, which would be a disaster. It is a potential reality. So let's hope that's not the case. Fingers crossed it's a 2025 resolution, but litigation isn't a speedy process. We're waltzing into a year of this disagreement, and we also don't know when, if, or even if there is litigation processes going on. We could have a situation where the two teams are trying to thrash it out themselves, and then eventually that morphs into litigation, but we don't know when that occurred. So it could be some time yet before, unfortunately, we have a resolution. Again, I think the bottom line is that it sucks. So either way, stay tuned. Certainly, if there is an announcement, you're going to be hearing it from me, and I'm sure other content creators as well.
Dodge 1, cleared direct to waypoint 4, contact Alley Cat.
Dodge flight push 7 left. Alley Cat, Dodge 1, flight of 2, checking in as fragged.
Now, I want to clarify some statements I made last week too. If there's any confusion on my stance regarding the Russian-Ukraine conflict right now, statements that I made there may not have been as clear as I had intended. That was because that particular statement that I made wasn't part of my original script. So I want to clarify, I don't condone Russia's actions towards Ukraine. I'm fully in support of Ukraine. I'm deeply, deeply concerned about their ability to resist the onslaught that they're facing from Russian designs on territory and whatever else they are justifying their acts of aggression against Ukraine. As I described earlier, Russia has a history of flattening cities and brutalizing the populations within territories it wants. Something I'm very concerned about, something I have a passion about with regards to investigating war crimes and investigating criminal activity. One of my many jobs over the years, I actually have had considerable experience interviewing the victims of sexual violence as an investigator, so got really good at that. Strangely enough, that's not something I intended, something I kind of ended up falling into. So we have seen a lot of reports of the horrors inflicted on both civilians and captured combatants, which unfortunately the Russian army has a dark history and experience with if you go back into World War II. And obviously also our more recent history. Now, some people have asked me to keep politics out of DCS, which I generally do try to avoid. However, as a history major, and in the context of some of the theaters of operations that we discuss here, there's going to be a little bit of inevitable overlap. Even with the best efforts, sometimes stuff is going to come out. The history major in me makes it difficult. I find it difficult to just gloss over stuff or be glib about things. Whenever I do that, that causes a problem, as you saw from last week. So again, I'm not intending to be overtly political. This is not a political channel by any stretch of the imagination. I do try to keep it focused on DCS World. If you take umbrage or offense at that, well, there's other channels I guess you can go to, but I hope you'll stick around because, like I said, I have a passion for history, I have a passion for DCS and the aircraft that are in it, and every now and again, I feel the need to branch out from time to time, but that's not the norm, it's the exception. So again, please accept any apologies if I was not clear last week, or if I offended anybody about what perhaps was the stance that I wasn't intending to deliver. Anyway, that'll do. That's out of the way. Thanks again for tuning in to the DCS SITREP once again, and stay tuned for the next episode for more information and news about all the fantastic aircraft that we have in this game and all of the development and exciting developments that we have. So we'll see you next time. Cheers.